I made 100% more than the cost of my mortgage, even when my house went down in value by nearly 40% during a recession. In this educational episode, I'm going to talk about how to make 100% to 300% returns on OPM, other people's money, just like banks do. So I'm Doug Andrew. I've been a financial strategist and a retirement planning specialist now for nearly 5 decades. And clear back at the turn of the century, I finally released my first book, which frankly took me 10 years to write because I was a perfectionist back then. And then it got the attention of Time Warner. They commissioned me to write several additional books, and every one has been a bestseller. I've now authored 12 books, and I think I'll keep authoring books the rest of my life. Now, my first books were titled Missed Fortune and Missed Fortune 101 because of the fortunes people miss out on when they simply don't know what they don't know. They don't understand how money works or how to become maybe their own banker. So let me share with you an actual example of how I was able to make 100% more than the net cost of my funds on real estate equity that disappeared out of my house during a recession. You ready? Okay. So how to make 100, 200, 300%. Does it sound too good to be true? No, banks do this all the time. They borrow OPM and they pay a lower interest rate. So let's talk about this. Banks from after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, when interest rates started to come down, clear until 2015, 16, and 17, banks were getting away with borrowing OPM, other people's money, at 1% or less. So every $1 million that we lend banks by putting it into their institutions, they're going to pay us $10,000 a year in interest. Okay. Now they turn around and they loan that money back. And sometimes they put actually 30 to 40% of their tier 1 assets are invested into insurance companies. Why? Because the legal reserve insurance industry is the backbone of America, the backbone of the world. They've weathered the Depression with flying colors. And when 400 banks went under in 2008 and 900 more were on the brink of going under, the federal government asked the 5 major banks in America to disclose where they had their tier 1 assets for liquidity and safety. Guess where it was at? Insurance companies. Because they're safer. They're usually rated, AA or AAA, where a lot of banks maybe only have a BBB rating, which is 6 notches higher in safety. So they're borrowing OPM at 1%, increasing the safety by 6 notches higher, and they're earning in the insurance company 4% or 5%, even without linking to an index. How much more is 4 than 1? Don't say 3. They're making $40,000. Okay, that's 4 times, 400%. Would you hire an employee for 10 grand that made you an extra 40 grand? I'll do that all day long. That's called a 400% return on employment cost. So people say, well, Doug, how do you do this? How do you become your own banker? Well, if I borrow money on real estate or equipment or whatever at 3 3/4%, that's $37,500 on $1 million loan. But if it's tax deductible, which I make sure it is, in a 33% tax bracket, it's only costing me 2.5. Do the math. So it's only costing me really $25,000 because I get to write this off. In a 33% bracket, it saves me that much money, $12,500. And so my net out of pocket is only 25 grand. And I turn around and on that $1 million in my laser funds over in this pocket, compounding, tax-free, this is the debt in this pocket, liabilities here, assets in this pocket, I'm making 10%. I have averaged 10.07% on my laser funds by diversifying and rebalancing every year since 1980. I've earned 11.17, netted 10 since 1997. Ever since 1980, I've averaged 9.62, even back when we only had universal life and not index universal life. And so I'm making the 400%. The banks are making 400%. We're both happy, but you can't believe how many people are unhappy because they don't take the time to get it, okay? Now, when you become your own banker, let me show you on my home back in 2007. I could see the writing on the wall, And so I had my $1.5 million home mortgage to the hilt, first mortgage and a second mortgage up to the full value, okay? And so at the time, I was paying an average of 4.5% deductible interest, $67,000 a year, a net cost of 3% in a 33% bracket. So my mortgage was costing me $45,000. Now on that $1.5 million, I was earning 8 plus, okay? I'm just gonna be super conservative here. How much more is 8 than that, okay? That's a $75,000 profit. That is $75,000 of profit becoming my own banker that I would not have earned had I had my house paid off. So far, so good. Well, what happened in 2008? Real estate values plummeted. My house went down 400 grand to $1.1 million. Now, I had critics go, neener, Mr. Andrew, you're underwater. You owe more than your house is worth. Did I care? No. Did my mortgage lender care? No. Why? Because they were too busy foreclosing on people who had no liquidity. I had tons of liquidity, okay? I was able to peel off just a portion of the interest I'm earning to make my mortgage payment. Because I had good credit, they were not worried about it. If I had left my money in the property, I would have been guaranteed a $400,000 loss. I didn't lose a dime. I still had that $400,000 that I separated. I didn't lose it. If I left it in the property, I would have lost it for sure for several years before the value came back to $1.5 million. Let's just carve out that $400,000. That $400,000, if I was borrowing that at 6% tax deductible interest, that's $24,000, but it's really a net cost of 4%. And if I was earning 8% on that $400,000, I'm making 32 grand. By the way, that's just the first year. This is going to keep compounding to a bigger sum, and you're going to earn more and more interest than the net cost of the funds. This is the very first year. How much more is 32 than 16? It's 100% more. I am making 100% more than the net cost on $400,000 of equity on my home that was no longer in my home because the house went down in value. I was a hero to my mortgage company. I could peel off half of what I was earning in my laser funds and make the mortgage payment. I was in great shape, and the banks were too busy foreclosing on people who had all of their equity tied up in the property. And all of a sudden, when they borrowed at 80% loan to value on $1.5 million property, they owed $1.1 million. It was only worth $1 million. They owed $1.2 million, and it was only worth $1.1 million. And they said, I don't have the money because all of it was tied up in the property. They don't understand. See, the banks, the mortgage lenders are going to foreclose on those people the quickest who have the lower mortgage balances because they can come out ahead. If you have a high mortgage balance, and if I did miss any payments, they'll work with me all day long. Oh, Mr. Andrew, we'll do this, we'll do that. If you have a whole bunch of equity in your property, you better watch out. They'll foreclose on you in 90 days because that's the deal. Sometimes people don't understand this. Okay, so let's talk about one of my clients who has several duplexes and fourplexes. And when he came in, he actually had $600,000 in IRAs or 401ks that he had been deferring for 10 years during the Great Recession, from 2000 to 2010. He saw that $600,000 in the market dwindle down to $360,000 twice because of that market volatility. At the end of 2010, going to 2012, the $600,000 was finally back to break even at 600 grand. And then his advisor said, I told you the market always comes back. Now I want you to just pull out the required minimum distribution, RMD. Let's just pull out the 4% rule. 4% on 600,000 was a horrible 24,000. He had to pay tax on that in a 33% bracket, netting him $16,000 to buy gas, groceries, prescriptions, and golf green fees. That's pathetic. That's unacceptable. So what I did is I said, let's get the money out of those IRAs or 401ks sooner than later, get the taxes over and done with. And so on 600,000, he was able to earn interest. I think he locked in like around 8.25% for 5 years while he was rolling it out. And so we pulled out 150 grand a year for 5 years and paid tax of 50 grand a year on his tax return. Now he would have netted 100,000 a year after paying tax. At the end of 5 years, 500,000 in a laser fund, earning 8%. That's 40 grand. How much better is 40,000 tax free than the 16,000 he was netting out of his IRAs or 401ks based on the financial services industry standard of 4% retirement payouts? 2.5, 3 times his income. But the rest of the story is yet to be told right now. I was able to save him $250,000 of tax by resurrecting deductions that he had been killing by sending extra principal payments on his rental properties against the mortgage. He came and got the epiphany and he goes, oh my heck. Yeah. And so I was able to resurrect deductions and we got all $750,000 over a 5-year period out of his IRAs or 401ks with no tax because I offset that with new deductions. What am I talking about? Every single duplex or fourplex that we borrowed on, he could go pretty fast and borrow $1 million. That was sort of his limit per property at the time. He would borrow at 4.5% tax deductible interest. So he's going to now pay $45,000 in annual interest payments, but it's tax deductible now. So that offsets $45,000 of income on the front page of his 1040 tax return when he starts pulling out 150 grand a year out of his IRAs. It only took 3.5, 4 properties to where this was offsetting the entire tax on the withdrawals out of the IRAs or 401ks. The net cost of this was only 3% in a 33% bracket, okay? So the net cost is $30,000 on that mortgage on each one of those duplexes and fourplexes. And on this, he goes, Doug, what do I do with this million? Well, you put it over here and keep it liquid safe, earning a predictable rate of return of around 9% or higher. And he's been averaging between 9 and 10, tax-free in a laser fund, which he did. Every million that he separated, earning 9%. This is just the first year. This is before it starts compounding and gets bigger than this. He's earning 90, it's costing him 30. He hired an employee for 30 grand, and the employee's making him 3 times what the employee. Why would you fire that employee? He said, Doug, you're making me so much money, I don't know what to do with all of this. So he set up a sort of a charitable foundation. He's making 300% more than the cost of the funds, but the byproduct was he got out his $750,000 out of his IRAs or 401ks tax-free. We do this all the time, okay? So when you own a laser fund bank, you do the same thing. You have $1 million of cash value in there, and my savvy clients, if they need money as working capital for their business or for managing real estate or to get another piece of real estate, they could go withdraw $1 million out of their laser fund, but that's not what I would do. And they know how money works because they use index loans. Now, they could borrow $1 million at 2%, and the insurance company will only charge them 2%, and they'll credit them 2%. That's called a zero-wash loan, but that's not what most of them do. They understand how money works. They borrow at 5% on an index loan, so that's $50,000. They don't have to write out a check for that. And they turn around and they make an average of 10% like I have. How much more is 10 than 5? Don't say 5. It's 100% more. They're making 100% rates of return on the million while it's sitting in their policy. It's earning 10% and it's collateralizing the loan from the insurance company that's loaning them the money at half of what they're earning. Are you getting it? Well, let me tell you one last story. I had a client, this is 500% more. This client in 2017, he had several million in his policy. And he said, send me that form, Doug. It's a 1-page form. He puts his name and his policy number on the top. And it says, do you want to withdraw $1 million out of your cash value? No. What's the second box? Do you want to borrow $1 million from the insurance company using your cash value as collateral? Absolutely. Do you want to borrow at a zero-wash loan, or do you want to have the potential to make more than we're charging you? Yep, he checks that one. In 2017, he borrowed $1 million. He bought a piece of property and fixed it up and flipped it and made $3 million. In the meantime, the $1 million that was collateralizing the loan was credited that year the cap of 25%. That's 250 grand. So he made 250 grand on his $1 million in the policy that is collateralizing the loan. If you subtract the 5%, $50,000, the cost for the loan, he netted $200,000 or 20% tax-free on his million while he was using his million to make $2 or $3 million. But he was making 500% more than the cost of the loan. Why would you fire an employee that costs you 50 grand if that employee makes you 250 grand? That would be dumb, okay? So, I had a CPA that created this metaphor of a banana split. See, the max funded tax advantage insurance contract, the laser fund where I keep my money compounding tax-free, is like the banana. We do this to increase the liquidity, safety, and rate of return on your assets. If you have it tied up in your equipment or your property, they do not pass liquidity and safety and rate of return test. The whipped cream on top with the laser fund is you get this death benefit coming along for the ride, being paid for with a minuscule portion of money that would otherwise go out the window in unnecessary tax. The cherry on top is if you can tax deduct the interest. Now, I'll do this if I can't even deduct the interest. But if you can deduct the interest, that's the cherry on top. Are you getting it? So if you want to learn more, I would recommend that you understand what a laser fund can do for you. And so I would recommend you read and study my most recent best-selling book called The Laser Fund. It's a 300-page book, actually 2 books in one. This side is about 200 pages, 14 chapters with all the charts and graphs and explanations. If you're more of a right brain learner, you learn by stories, you flip it over to this book. This is about 100 pages, 12 chapters with 62 actual client stories. Now, you can go to Amazon and purchase this book for $20 plus shipping and handling. If you do that, thank you. But I'll gift you the book free. To claim your free copy, you simply go to laserfund, laserfund.com, or click on the link below, and you contribute a nominal amount to the shipping and handling. I require some skin in the game. And I'll fire out a hard copy to you via priority mail the next day. And then if you're in there claiming your free copy and you're interested in watching and learning or listening and learning, there's audio and video formats there. You can even schedule to attend one of our free educational webinars. But you can even put yourself in an appointment to talk to an IUL specialist who can create some illustrations on how to set up a laser fund correctly. Because there's a lot of agents out there that sell IUL. In fact, over 99% of them that don't know how to structure it to do what I talk about in the book. So it's very important that you talk to an IUL specialist. I would recommend looking at those that belong to our coalition and network that I train called IUL Insiders, okay? So if you're a professional watching this, you're missing out if you do not look at joining that coalition and network called IUL Insiders. You stay with your company and everything else, but you learn how to do this right, because there's too many loose cannons out there doing it wrong.